Welcome to the Death Talk podcast. The vision for this podcast is to break the culture of silence surrounding death and dying. I'm your host, Lisa Murray. My guest today is Betsy Heeney. She is the host of the podcast Elder and Wiser, and I actually know Betsy through a podcast group. And someone told me that she was starting a death cafe. And I thought, okay, I had already had this feeling that I meant to connect with her in some way. And I'd been listening to her podcast during my road trips from Arizona to California. And when I had the opportunity, when I found out she was starting a death cafe, I was like, all right, I'm reaching out to her. So this conversation today is really different than the other ones. I don't know if there is a theme yet, but both of us really didn't know why we were connecting other than death. That was the connection that we had. And so what you're about to listen to is just us discovering why we're talking to each other. And I really am so glad that she shared her perspectives. And I think that it's going to speak to somebody. And it really spoke to me because I don't want to say things, I don't want to ruin it. But one more thing, Betsy swears a little bit, and I swear a lot of bit, but I just don't do it in this podcast. But I might one day. I'm also the editor, so if I do, I cut it out. But not that I care. I don't even care. I don't even fucking care. Okay, wait, I went too far. The point is, Betsy swears a little bit, and I don't want to cut it out just because I think it's weird. It's an adult podcast, and there might be a little bit of an adult reference at a certain point, so just be aware of that. It's a brief mention of something that is a little adult in nature, so you might want to listen to this episode in headphones. One more thing I want to add, Betsy had a really unstable connection, so we dropped the connection like 4 or 5 times, and it got funny, so I had to leave some of it in because we just didn't even like pick up in the right spot. So anyways, I hope you enjoy the hell that we went through. No, it was a great interview, but it was just, internet connection. We cannot live without it. All right. Thank you. And I hope you enjoy today's show. So I just want to say that I have no idea what our conversation is going to be, but I do feel like we're meant to talk.
Yeah. As soon as I heard that, let me get a pencil. Hold on. As soon as I heard that you were doing the death podcast, I knew that you and I were going to talk.
That's great. Yeah, and I heard that you're, well, first of all, I think we connect on the art stuff anyways, and I love what you're doing. We originally connect on the podcast.
Yeah.
Because we're both part of a podcast group. And you have a podcast called Elder and Wiser.
Yes.
That I listened.
Thank you.
I was driving back from Arizona last time. And it just feels like I'm listening to people, like friends, talk about cool experiences and things that they've learned. And I love that. It was amazing. And
thank you.
You're welcome. And then also you're doing a lot of art shows and different things like that. And then I hear that you're starting, which I have the Ag and Art Film Festival. And so I'm always doing art stuff. And then you're starting a death cafe. And I'm like, okay, time that we get together.
Exactly.
Why are you starting a death cafe? What was the inspiration of that? Are you actually starting your own, or how is that working?
So let me just say this, that the Death Cafe was the idea of a woman that has attended my live events. And she listens now to Elder and Wiser, and was caught up in the spirit of, reaching out to people and talking about real issues around the whole reality of aging. And it came to her, and then she came to me and asked if I would sponsor it with her. And she's just an individual. She's actually she calls herself a social entrepreneur. Her name is Maggie Davenport. And she's an African-American woman who has a long history of being a facilitator and a trainer. And this woman has all sorts of experiences and skills, but she's new to Baltimore. So she had seen how my live events were growing and said, would I want to do this? And could I find a place for it to be sponsored? Well, it was supposed to be this weekend and it got canceled.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Coronavirus. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but she contacted the national organization of the Death Cafe, and it's under their tutelage that these death cafes take place around the country. It's a national organization.
Yes. Yeah. And I know they have over 10,000 death cafes now worldwide.
Right, right. And so what they do is give you somewhat of an outline and a structure and of like how to go about it. And then, kind of ask people to gather together and talk about their experiences, no matter what they are, and how people would want to talk about them. So I have to say that although I was sponsoring it, it wasn't my idea, but it seemed such a natural next step to see what kind of people we would attract and who would be interested in talking about that.
So you haven't been to a death cafe before?
No. Although I guess I need to preface this and say that I have trained as a Buddhist, and so there's been a lot of conversation in my training around the notion of death. So it's not something that I'm foreign to talking about, but talking about it on a personal level is, a whole different story.
Right. And, I've been to 2 death cafes.
Tell me about them.
Fascinating. Awesome. Feels like the missing piece in what we should all have in our regular lives. And I know that sounds really crazy, and old me would have been like, I'm never going to anything called a death cafe.
Right.
But new me, having had lost so many people, and I don't think you have to lose a bunch of people to enjoy or benefit from a death cafe, but it really is like what I'm living and breathing since their deaths. It's like a huge part of me is with them in the afterlife, in the unknown, in the whatever. So it's like going to a death cafe and being able to talk about it just feels like a relief. Like, I can talk about it without someone being like, oh God, this is so depressing, or, some kind of thing like that. So different, there's different, I'm sure it depends on who the facilitator is, and then just whatever. It's probably different every time because there's different people, but it's not a grief support group, and it's not religious. It's just a place for people to get together. So like some examples of some people that were in the group but it's like AA, there's a lot of confidentiality. So I'm not going to get into details, but examples of what type of people I saw were people in their seem to be 30s, 40s, maybe 30s that work in the end of life care in hospice. And they just want to be able to go somewhere and talk, openly about what they experience every day. There were a couple people actually who had terminal illness or terminal diagnosis. I couldn't tell that they were ill at all, but terminal diagnosis. And they just wanted a place where they could openly talk about something that's weighing heavily on their mind 24/7. Yeah. And other people who just always were open to it because they grew up in an environment where their families were, talked about it, or their parents are getting older. I know I saw a good mix of people, and it was a really interesting conversation. We even talked about the last one I went to. We talked about different cultures and how one person had served in the Peace Corps, and she was talking about this village that she was working within and how they dealt with death. And it was just really, I just thought about that for, all the way home. And for days after that, I just kept thinking about what she said and how we are in America and how we, and it was just, so it's great. I think they're awesome. And I think you're the perfect person to host something like that.
Right. Well, so the woman who approached me actually had listened to one of my podcasts that I had interviewed a death doula.
I didn't see that episode. Now I'm going to go check it out.
Right. Her name is Deborah Diamond, and she is a death doula. And she wrote a book called The Diary of a Death Doula, of a full year of when she was, very, very active and sitting with people as they passed. And her book came out in the beginning of the year, and I had interviewed her just as that book was coming out. So it was, and she's the one who first put in my ear the notion of what a death cafe was.
Right.
So, so this other woman who is a listener of mine decided that she wanted to do that. She just really felt called to do it. And I said, yeah, because I have my own experiences, and which is why I thought, oh yeah, Lisa, you and I are definitely going to be talking about this at some point, because I've been writing about my experiences and wrote a story called The Irish Hat, and it's about the death of my mother.
Oh, I like the name.
Yeah, well, there's a whole story to it. I don't know if you want me to get into it or not.
I do. Yeah.
It's really amazing because, unlike you, I did not get along with my mother. I mean, I'm not referring to your relationship with your mom, but to the people you lost and how deeply emotional and abandoned you felt, that you've expressed in your podcast and other places I've heard you talk about it. I had a completely different experience, and that's what I found so compelling for me to write about, because my experience with my mother only became almost culminated in the last 24 hours of her life. And so that's the basis of my story.
And so in the last 24 hours, there was healing for you?
It's interesting. I've been asked that question, and I belong to a writers group, and I wrote this story as part of, what I was writing and sharing with the group. And that was a lot of the question about the healing. I could read the story or I could tell you the story. I wasn't sure which way to go here. But I think probably I'll just recap it. How's that sound?
Whatever you're comfortable with. I'm good with anything. Okay. I don't feel like there's, you're on a time constraint, because this is a huge field just for Betsy. And
wow.
I want to unpack Betsy.
Oh man, this is a deep one. This is the part that is challenging for me to reveal, because it reveals the completely fucked up relationship I had with my mother. And because I can't just start within the 24 hours that she died. I have to start in the beginning. Right. So I think what I'll do, Lisa, is read it.
That sounds perfect.
Okay. And it's called The Irish Hat, which will be revealed why at the very end.
Okay, good. Oh, I'm excited.
The Irish Hat. I've always had a difficult relationship with my mother. I was her third child in the middle of what was to become 5. I was the scapegoat. My earliest memory is being chained to the swing set by her with only our dog, a German Shepherd, keeping me company. I apparently had a habit of running after my older brother and sister on their way to school, and this is the only way she could figure out how to restrain me. We moved from the suburban subdivision just outside D.C. to the rural area of Maryland in Montgomery County. My earliest memory of that time was when I was 5. My dad uprooted our growing family into a farmhouse in a small town in the middle of nowhere. Just after a 14-year-old neighbor had rubbed his penis across my naked body inside an old black hearse across the street from our farmhouse, I ran across the street up our driveway only to run into my mother. My mother was outside weeding the garden, And I looked at her, and she looked at me. She looked at me with a second glance, with a question mark on her face. "Where have you been?" she asked. "Playing with Sissy," I said, and ran up to my room. To say the least, even at the age of 5, I did not trust my mother, and never did until the last day of her life. We had no idea how to communicate with each other. My mother was a neatnik. With 5 children, she kept a very structured schedule. During the summers, we had our chores around our little farmstead. I despised every chore I was assigned, especially ironing my older brother's shirts. I would get back at her by the smallest things. I would load the dishwasher so poorly the dishes wouldn't wash properly. When she would hide candy or presents from us kids, I'd find them and sneak the key and show the treats and show everyone their presents. I think her revenge was trying to force me to be neat like her. It was her common practice to go into my room and empty all my drawers and everything in my closet into the middle of the room, then lock me in the room until it was all cleaned up. I would scream and cry and finally fall asleep on top of the pile of stuff. After a while, I would wake up and slowly sort everything into neat piles and bring order to my room. Only then would I knock on the door to announce that I was ready to come out. There were days that my mother did show care for me, and those were the days when my chronic bronchitis would keep me bedridden. She would bring chicken soup and orange juice, change my sheets, and help me into fresh pajamas. Turns out I inherited her sensitive lungs, so we had at least that in common. To be fair, one thing my mother and I did have in common, more than any of her other kids, was a shared love of clothing and jewelry. She was classy, and I loved her style. When she wasn't around, I would go into her closet and try on her shoes and coats. It was a sad day when my feet got larger than hers and my other sisters got her hand-me-downs. When my mother's emphysema took over her life and the oxygen tanks that she had become dependent upon to breathe no longer helped her, she was placed in critical care and off went all the machinery. She had a full 5 hours to breathe on her own, during which she received last rites from a priest and private time with each of her children. On one of the last days of her life, she received the last rites from a priest in her hospital bed. When the priest asked if she had any regrets about her life, she said that she had several. One was going against the Catholic Church when she took birth control, and another was divorcing my dad. Before the priest could answer, I said to her, "Mom, why do you think God is Catholic?" And the look on her face was pure shock, and turned her head towards the priest and asked, "Is that true, Father? Is God not Catholic?" He shook his head in agreement. She looked at him, then at me, and said, "How does Betsy know that?" Her third regret that she shared with the priest and all of us around her was her regret in how she treated me, her middle child. Sometimes when I look back at this moment, I still can't believe those words that came through her lips. The priest smiled and said that God forgave her, but the question was, did I? She turned and looked at me, and I to her, and I said, "Yes, Mom, I forgive you." Later, when each of the kids had the chance to spend time with her alone, we had the most substantive conversation of our lives. I walked into the room and sat next to her bed. "So how are you doing, Mom?" She said she was good and ready to go. We sat together in our hospital room quietly for a few moments, and then my eyes rested on a bag of candy that included a Babe Ruth, which was one of my father's favorite candies when we were little kids. "Do you want to share a Babe Ruth?" I asked. "Sure," she said, and we settled into another few moments of silence. She looked at me and asked, "Are you going to be all right?" I was almost 40 years old, single with a 5-year-old son. I had just moved across the country and was struggling. "Sure, Mom, I'm going to be fine. Growing up as the middle of 5 children was a competitive experience. I lied, cheated, and stole whatever I could get to make things even in my own mind. One summer, I almost burnt the kitchen down because I was so mad that there was just one frozen French fry in the freezer bag. Just to be stubborn, I dropped it into a hot pot of oil and forgot about it, and the fire trucks arrived shortly. As I sat there next to my mom, I went, oh, Jesus, here it comes. I thought, she's going to tell me that she's cut me out of the will. I surrendered. I'm not even going to ask. But to cut my losses, I told her that there was one thing that I would like to have that hadn't been discussed. You want my mink coat, don't you? She said. And there, right then, the forgiveness started to happen. I hadn't even thought of that. No, Mom. I was wondering if I could have your Irish hat. And her eyes softened and her whole face lit up. The Irish hat was one of her trademark hats that she had purchased on a trip to Ireland. I had always admired it, and when she wasn't around, would wear it every chance I could. But I said, you know how everybody is. They're all going to think that I'm stealing it. So just to cover me, would you write an addendum to your will right here, right now in writing, so that I can show everybody that you really did give it to me? I would be honored to, she said. So I got her a piece of paper and a pencil, and she wrote, I, Elizabeth A. McKenna, bequeath to my daughter, Elizabeth A. Heeney, my Irish hat on this day, May 20th, 2000. Soon after we finished the Babe Ruth, I left the room, and I never saw my mother conscious again. The Irish hat hangs on a hook outside of my closet door with all the sweetness of that moment remembered forever in it. And I don't know how it came to pass, but I ended up getting the mink coat too.
Oh. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I could never tell that story, Lisa, until I sat down and wrote it. I never told that story from the day. I think maybe once I tried to tell it and I was like, oh my God, people think I'm so morbid, right? You know, talking about that death and the kind of tortured relationship we had. But it's only in the past, short period of time that I've started to realize how powerful that story is for me to tell it.
Right.
And for people to hear it.
Yeah. And it's like the fact that we just don't allow ourselves to talk about death and that moment and all the things that it brought up. And then the relationship is just like, it's the truth. It's reality. It's what you've experienced. Why are there areas of what you've experienced in life that you can't talk about?
Right.
I don't get it.
I know.
I do not get it.
Yeah. I think for me, my own experience was wrapped up in a lot of shame. The liberating sense of the freedom to be able to talk about those things that I thought were chained shut, in my own experience, it was out of shame and embarrassment that I had such a tortured experience with my mother. And I was wondering, like in the death cafes, because we haven't had them yet, but we're about to have them, at least one, and see where it goes. To talk about these kind of experiences would seem to be a natural place to do it. Has that been your experience in the two that you went to?
Oh yeah, definitely. People talk about the spiritual stuff, like weird and amazing things that happen or that happened after they died or during they were sitting with them, something that they felt.
Right.
But all the way to anger at something that was going on while they were dying, whether it was medically or I don't know, with a conversation or something. And so there's just so much to the whole entire thing that there's any topic. And so that's what I love about the death cafes that I went to, or just the concept in general, is
Right.
just that nothing's off topic. You can talk
Right.
about anything. And it's like, really?
Right. Right.
Huge. Because Derek, my friend Derek who died, it was violent, and it might be, we're not sure, it could be a murder. And I hate that I can't talk about that without people being like, oh God.
Right.
Like, look, I have to talk about this, not only because he's an amazing person and now the world won't know him anymore, only the people that got to know him up until that point. I want to talk about him for the rest of my life. But then also, like, my brother who died after a successful surgery, but it was unexpected. But he was in a hospital. And so the best possible things that could have been done for him were done for him.
Yeah.
So that makes me know that it was really his time, because it wasn't like he was camping and the paramedics couldn't get to him. I mean, he was in a hospital when he crashed. So all these different things are different experiences that I'm still mad. I still was like, asking my mom, wait, okay, the nurses asked you to leave the room. And then what happened?
Right.
We want to know everything because we want to know everything. Number one, we're going to experience it. And number two, these are the people that we love.
Right.
And want to know what's going on, what happened.
Yeah.
I hate not being able to talk about it. I grew up too, where we couldn't really talk about death.
No. My mother gave birth to a stillborn child in Ireland on a trip that we took as a family when we were young, like in the 60s. And she stayed behind. And when the family came back all together, and she arrived back from Ireland after a period of rest, and we came back from the trip, my father would set a placemat at the table for this child that none of us had known. And honestly, I believe it was very, very painful for my mother, because my father was more. It was more like, this was his child, not our. I don't know. It was a strange kind of Medal of Honor almost, that he had a son who was born in Ireland.
I see.
Kind of thing, because we shifted our whole daily habit of having tea on Sundays, just the Irish way, which we had never had before. It was kind of weird, and we never talked about it. It was just that we changed. We had tea, and there was a placemat. It's weird.
That is weird. Like, from a kid perspective, it's weird. It's like, no one's going to explain this to us. We just all of a sudden have to do it. Okay, great.
Right.
Your dad sounds very adventurous. Was your dad very adventurous?
Well, I think he was definitely an Irishman, and he was a first generation Irishman. So I think that, any ties to the old country really, really called upon him deeply. My dad died young. He died at 59, and he was not ready to go. And he was very frustrated that he was dying so young, and he had a really tumultuous personal life, and he was just getting his feet back on the ground, and he died. He quit drinking, and 6 months later, he died. So it was.
How did he die?
He died of cancer, and a metastasized cancer that it took 6 months, and that's it.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So.
Were you able to be with him towards the end?
Yes, but it was really, again, nobody talked about it in a way that we could talk. I mean, we sat around. My dad was a hell of a storyteller, and he was a criminal defense attorney. He had done some amazing things. He had quit his law practice in Maryland, and went out to gave up a year of his time, and went out to Wounded Knee and defended the Indians. And this was a Republican, a Nixonite in the 60s and 70s, and then started working with Kunstler. So it was a really a wild turn of events from my dad. So in that case, yeah, I guess the answer is, yeah, he was adventure. He was an adventurer.
Sounds like it. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, he was a character. And a lot of what I'm doing is really, I feel like I'm channeling back into my original talents and instincts came from my dad and the influences that I had with him. Because I always had been into telling stories and to doing theater, and always wanted to be like him. And so I think when I teach visual art, I'm an art teacher, but I think my real original calling has always been performance and storytelling and writing. And that's how I got into the podcast. That was the instinct or the impulse that drove me into that.
Okay. So. Yeah, because you can really do so much with this storytelling, and you're the producer of the whole thing.
Yeah, I know. I've really admired how you have really worked on that and used that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, with the I Have Dreams, Damn It podcast, my other podcast.
Yeah.
I really like using music to, I don't know, I like to be creative with that one. Whereas this one's more straightforward and I just want to talk about death. My mom said, actually thinking about the topic, my mom's like, maybe you should call it Dying to Talk to You. That's the Irish Catholic in her that's like, let's put some soft pillows around that. And I'm like, no, I want it to be Death Talk podcast. I want people to know exactly where they are. I don't want them to be confused about,
well, Lisa, it's so interesting. I mean, the story that I've just revealed about my mom is that, but I was the one at the end of her life, and after everything ended, I'm the one who gave her the talk at the eulogy.
Oh, the eulogy. Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah, because everybody else was so broken up. And I was like, no, she apologized to me. I forgave her. She gave me the hat. And she didn't write me out of the will. I'm good. It was like, trust me, I'm like weird about this whole thing. And whereas my other brothers and sisters were beside themselves. And I was always pissed that I was never asked to speak at my father's memorial. And I said, I'll be damned if that's going to happen here, because I've kind of had to come to Jesus time with my mother.
Yeah.
Now, my older sister, who is a nurse, she flew in the middle of the night, and my mom was put on a morphine drip in the hospice because, like I said, she was on emphysema. She had emphysema, and they took everything off, and she looked like she was born again for a short time. And my sister flies in and says, "Oh my God, this is a mistake," and she takes her off the morphine. I mean,
oh God,
wacky shit. And
I've heard that happening, that like all of a sudden they just look better, and family members that haven't been there at all come in and they start, which is also part of the denial. They're like, what are you doing? We're doing the wrong thing, Wow.
That's exactly what happened in my family. And it was like, my younger brother, who was her I guess, attorney, what do you call it? The next...
Power of attorney?
Yeah, the power of attorney was called by the nurses station to get his ass down there and remove his sister from the room. It was just like crazy. Because my mother was like, she was ready to go. I've never seen anything like it. It was as close to, organized suicide or legal suicide as I think you could have gotten. And because it was all very premeditated and planned. And she was fine. She was fine with it, and that's the way she wanted it, and that's the way she got it.
That's great.
Yeah. So I mean, and then within a very short period of time, my younger brother also passed away with melanoma, And he was
Oh.
only 50 years old, and he had a third wife and a lovely woman, happily married with a 6-month-old and a 6-year-old. And
Oh.
bam, he died, and it was it was a miserable experience.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, yeah. And then of
No,
course there's the whole thing when you have these tragedies in your life, and I was much more emotional with my brother than I was with my mother, because it was my younger brother. And I think what happens, because that was more tragic than my mother, who had been ill and approaching, but was in a hospital. It wasn't violent or anything like that. But what happened was, for me, I did the worst thing possible in response to that. I married his best friend, who turned out to be a jerk. And
this is during the time after he died?
yeah, well, like within the year. Within the year of my
Oh.
brother dying, I married his best friend, who was also grieving. And so, and in that experience, very quickly, I married the guy, and I couldn't have chosen a worse person to marry. And it was this bond of like, oh, life is short. We got to, find people we connect with. We connect,
Right.
and it was just a terrible marriage, and it didn't last that long, and it uprooted my whole life. And it was really hard that was quite a recovery coming out of that.
And it can also probably be a way of trying to keep your brother alive. Like,
well, yes,
No?
right. He reminded me a lot of my brother. They had a lot of the mannerisms. They had been friends for many years. They were college roommates. And I think what I was trying to do was to read close when he was younger. And I think it got all fucked up. I mean, I got all mixed up in that, and and dived into this marriage, which, was, just a one big mistake. And I hate it when people say, well, there's never any mistakes. And I'm going, no, this was a mistake.
Yeah, there's some things that are mistakes. Exactly.
This is definitely
So
a mistake.
since we're talking about your brother, I would like to know what you told me a little bit, but growing up, were you afraid of death? Because Catholic, right?
Right.
So what are your thoughts about death? And you weren't allowed to talk about it, but
Right.
were you personally like, I don't really care? Or were you like deathly afraid? Or did you have any thoughts about it?
No, that's the thing. There's something about me that is, oh God, I wouldn't say I'm afraid of it. Now, I'll tell you, the person you should talk to is my younger sister. And my younger sister had experiences with death with close friends at a very young age. And she has some really traumatic experiences around death. Now, for me, I don't. I would say that it was my brother that was the first time that I truly wanted to change places with him. I mean, I truly wanted, if I could have had it, because of my son had been raised, he was in college, and his children were so young that even though our relationship was not as close as it once was, I just prayed that why wouldn't it be me instead of him? Like, what kind of God would do that? That's probably the most riveting experience with death that I've truly ever had, because my mother's was, like I said, so calculated. But the only time that I remember as close to death, and my father was, that was tragic, but it was such a blur, I think, that I don't really remember much about that. Because, we all drank Johnny Walker Red and ate potato salad. I mean, that's how his funeral was. I mean, it was just a mess, but, a real Irish wake. But when his mother died, when I was like, I don't know, I must have been 6, I remember kneeling at her coffin. It was an open coffin. And I remember staring at her long past the time that I was supposed to. And I remember my father, in the funeral home, and I remember my father coming up to me and guiding me away. But I remember staring at her, seeing if she really was dead, that maybe she was really breathing, and I was waiting to see the breathing.
How old were you?
6.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It sounds like to me, like what I feel from you is that I feel like you're an old soul. And I feel like you've been here a lot of times. I mean, this is just me. So, take
I
it with a
love
grain
it.
of
Tell
salt.
me more.
But I sense that you're an old soul and that you've been here a lot of times and you're just here to experience some other things, different things. And like some people are still just, gingerly tiptoeing up to the whole issue. And you were like, yeah, okay. So anyways, people die. And you're like kind of moving on, not saying that you don't then circle back and re-experience and relearn,
Right.
but I just sense that you're kind of, I don't think you're insensitive. I think you just have learned already so many things that you already know all that stuff.
That's so interesting. There's something about me that is not really afraid of it. I mean, other than, afraid of the pain. My mother, like when I think about what's happening now with the coronavirus and the whole upper respiratory and pneumonia problem, my mother and I shared that with her. Like I had mentioned in the story. And the last thing on earth she was going to let happen to her was to be incubated. And never, they were never to put her on a ventilator, no matter what. She was always, and she, the oxygen tank was one thing, but the ventilator was another, and that was not going to happen. And I have to say, I mean, I have self-quarantined my husband and I have self-quarantined because we're both because I am afraid of that. And because I know what it's like to have pneumonia. I've had it twice. And there's just no way that, that's the way I want to go. I can, if I can avoid it. I think I wanted to say another thing about the death issue. Like I mentioned that I have studied Buddhism, and I studied Shambhala Buddhism for about 7 years. And it's only recently that I kind of pulled myself out of that whole track. But for a period of time, I was very much interested in learning about the bhumis. Are you familiar with the transition that the Buddhists believe that people go through of consciousness?
No, I don't think so.
Well, what basically it's the consciousness is out, is beyond our bodies, right? And it's the same consciousness we have, and now, and but once we are actually, well, if you're a Buddhist, you have a guide who sits with you for a period of days and guides you through the consciousness of the bhumis, so that you go from like one phase into another of so that when you are find your next life, that you rise to a higher level. And it depends on the practice of how aware you are of your consciousness while you're in your body, which is why people, go into caves for so long and become so, part of lineages, is that they're preparing for the next life. And so, and the bhumis is the stages of consciousness you go through. And if you have someone who's trained in this, that they actually guide you through it. It's something that you might, I am no expert.
I'll look into that. Yeah, I'll look into that. I've never heard the term even.
Yeah. I'll send you a link. Voluminous Luminosity is the name of a book of the woman's name is Francesca. I'm going to have to look it up. But that's when I was first introduced to it. And I was just, it blew my mind because it made sense to me. And I wonder about your kind of like, your insight into that I've been around before, because it seems to, none of this seems surprising to me.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I totally believe that we all have that ancient knowledge. But if you've been here so many times, it's sort of like, because if we're spirits and everything's energy, but then we come to the physical world and the physical body and the fear and survival and all the different things that happen being in a physical body, if you came to Earth a bunch of times, you would come in and go, okay, I know this suit, this flesh suit. I know how to maneuver it. I know what's up. But if you're and feeling inspiration and insight and how it feels when it's in your body and how to allow it and how not to be afraid of it. That's why I say for me, it feels like you're an old soul, because it feels like the flesh suit is worn, like, you know, it's like a baseball glove, you know, you're just like, okay. And you're like right connected to your spirit. So that's why if you hear something about, you know, Buddhism before you even knew about it, you'd instantly recognize it in your body and in your whole being. Like, yeah, I know this. Whereas someone else who is more trapped inside of their flesh suit, sounds
I like
awful.
that flesh suit.
But it's kind of densing out deadening out the knowing. And that's why it feels more like a sort of a vague familiarity,
right,
to not even being familiar at all, because you might be so disconnected from your spirit.
right.
And that you could be an old soul and want to experience that. I don't know. Maybe you come back as like a dense person. I don't know.
I don't know. But see,
I don't know. I just like to talk about it.
Well, I know, but Lisa, here's the thing. Like my sister I've mentioned is she started going to psychics when she was like 15. And she's very much moved by spirit. And she's now very much into crystals. She's gone deep into crystal healing, and she's a practitioner of that, and for helping other people. And she feels that, you know, she talks to my brother, she talks to my mother, she talks to my father, and they show up to her in ways that I can't even imagine. Like, I am so, like, I don't feel that stuff. I can't even, you know, I can't even make that shit up, because it just doesn't, that's not where I am. That's not how I'm plugged in. It's weird. That someone, you know, that we were raised, that she has a thin veil for her, and I have a very thick one. Now, it's been very interesting for me as a process of that veil thinning, and really accepting guides and accepting my intuition as being part of a spirit that is beyond me. That's been a slow process for me. And you know, quite frankly, I went to a I went to a workshop with Julia Cameron in December. She's the author of The Artist Way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it was very interesting to me, because she said that anybody who doesn't believe in guides is living in the dark age, because this veil has gotten so thin that people who are not awake to it are just either in denial or just, you know, tremendously shut down. And of course, being the competitive middle child, like, I don't want to be the one left behind.
I've got guides.
Yeah. No,
come on, guides.
I'm going to find those damn guides. Come on, show up.
Well, and I think that we're all here for different experiences. And when I say old soul, maybe I don't even know what I'm talking about, because I think also that we're all here for different experiences. So it's not fair. It's like if you're, you know, it's like college versus grade school. In college, you're taking courses based on your goals. Whereas in grade school, there's different levels of learning.
Yeah.
So maybe it's, you know, a combination of the two. I don't know.
So I'm so curious, Lisa, I don't mean to turn this back on you, but
I like it when it's about me. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, like, why do you think you cannot let go of the circumstances surrounding the death of your brother and your friend?
Oh, I don't think I'm holding on to it. I just think it's part of my it's part of my life for the rest of my life. Derek was the closest adult in my life, more than my family. Like he was the most close I felt to anybody. And, I even told him when we met in my early 20s, I was like, and I've never said this to anybody else, but I said, whoever dies first, let's promise that we're going to come back if there's an afterlife, and we'll let the other one know that we're okay. And he would laugh. And I was like, why are you laughing? He's like, what makes you think I'm going to die first? I'm like, I don't, but I'm just saying, I need you to promise this right now. So he did. He said, okay, I will. And then after he died, he massively, and I didn't know what was going on. It was terrifying me, actually.
But guess what? I lost you completely.
Oh, no.
Isn't that interesting when you just said what was terrifying? Because I asked you, did you hear my question?
No.
I said, have you heard from him?
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, definitely. I didn't know, because he may have been murdered. I didn't what the energy I knew of him to be when right after he died. I felt this buzzing around me. And it's interesting because I look back now and think that's pretty specific and strange, but when I was in it, I just was reacting to it. And I was like, and I kind of tensed up my body, and I would say, go away. I don't feel safe. I'm putting a bubble from, white bubble from God's love all around me, all the things I heard. I just felt like there was some kind of weird energy around me, and it was scaring me. And I didn't know what was going on. And I was very distraught, very traumatized. The last time I talked to him, I felt like there was a death energy around him, which is really weird. I've never even said death energy before. And, and so when he was killed, it was just so traumatic that I was in so much grief, and this buzzing. And I also smelled cigarette smoke.
Wow.
And where we lived, I didn't think he smoked because he's very healthy, jogs up, mountains. He's really, really healthy. And I thought it was the neighbors. And I told my boyfriend, I'm like, can you make sure all the windows are closed? Because the cigarette smoke from the neighbors must be coming over here. Because, in LA, all the houses are really close together. Yeah. And I was like, I feel like someone must be visiting them that smokes and is sitting outside because it's really strong. And he goes, okay. So he'd go around and pretend like I found out he was pretending, because like a couple weeks later, he's like, I actually don't smell anything.
Oh my God.
Like, what? It burned my nose. It was irritating to me. And anyway, so I went to Northern California, which is where I am now. And I was staying with a friend, and that's where Derek's funeral was, because he was killed in San Francisco. And I was staying with my friend right before the funeral, and his cousin, who lives on the East Coast, who's psychic, called him and said, you have a friend there that lost somebody. And he said, yeah. And she said, tell her that he's trying to keep his promise to her, and she keeps pushing him away.
Oh my God. Boy, yeah. You can't ignore that.
Right. And there's another thing too. When we actually used to date, and when we were together, it was during the time of, Jim Carrey had just gotten his Chinese Walk of Fame thing, and whatever you call it. What do you call those things? Like
the star.
The star. Where they put their handprints and stuff. Yeah. And he wrote Merrily, 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 ... And then Jay Leno said, he was Jay Leno time. He said, what does that mean? He goes, and Jim said, because life is but a dream, and everything in life starts from a dream. Well, I had reoccurring dreams about Jim Carrey at that time, right before my grandmother died. And so we were like, oh my God. And he had never talked deep like that before. Now everybody knows Jim Carrey as being deep, but at that time he was talking out of his ass, in Pet Detective, literally. Remember that scene where he's talking out of his ass.
Right.
So, I was like, oh my God. And so we knew that to be like our dream thing. And so we had that connection. So anyways, the other thing the psychic said to my friend was, and I keep hearing row, row, row your boat. And I don't know what that means, but maybe she will. And obviously I know exactly what that means. And so there were like so many things that happened like that. So yeah, I guess I asked for it, many years ago, but
right.
It didn't feel like what I would think someone visiting you would feel like. It actually felt scary.
Right.
And another night or during the day, I was there for probably, I think, less than a week. And I could not be alone. This is the other thing I haven't emphasized enough. I couldn't be alone for a couple months. I don't know why. I was looking back, I can see that it's weird, but at the time it felt normal. I could not be alone ever. So my boyfriend would have to do everything with the door open. And so I'm up in Northern California for the funeral. And I told my friends, I said, do not leave me alone. Everybody left for work. And my close friend, Jerry, I said, do not leave me. And he comes in, he goes, I just have to go to Home Depot really fast. And he lives in the country. I'm like, there is no fast. Please don't leave me. He goes, I'll be right back. And I was so tired that I was just like, okay, but hurry. And he goes, okay, I will. So I fell asleep and I was still kind of in between asleep and awake. And I felt the buzzing, but it was too late because I was on the other side of almost falling asleep. And I felt it rush underneath the bed. And I felt it almost starting to go through me. And I started to tense up like, oh, no. And I heard it say, relax. And I don't know whose voice it was, if it was his or someone else, I don't know, but it just said, relax. And when I relaxed, it went through my heart. Betsy,
Shoot.
I promise you, this really happened. It went through my heart and it stayed there. And it was like it was recalibrating my heart to a different vibration, like getting it back to pre-heartbreak, which had happened. And it was like ripples of love, the most immense love I've ever felt in my life, rippling from my heart all the way out my body. And then it just dissipated. Wow. And I was sobbing and I was in a state of deep peace for days after that. And so anyways, yes, he has visited me.
Yeah.
In dreams too, a lot of different ways. But so to get back to your question, I don't think I haven't let it go. I just think it's so much a part of who I am.
Yeah.
That I just like if you I don't know, if you train to be an Olympic swimmer for 20 years, you're going to talk about that. It's not that you're not letting it go. It's just, it's a huge part of your consciousness.
Right.
Or if you were, I don't know, I can't even think of any examples, but just any kind of thing that's huge that happened to you. And especially if it's the hugest thing that happened to you, of course, you're going to live and breathe it. If you're conscious, go back to the Buddhism thing. If you're raising your consciousness to your experience as a human being here, as a spirit, you're living this life here. If you are raising your consciousness, then you're allowing for those things to be part of your consciousness because they're part of your experience.
Right. Right.
You know? So ultimately it's all about being more conscious while we're alive.
Yeah. I've become quite a fan of Sam Harris. Do you know him? Do you know?
No, Sam Harris.
He started up, he wrote a book called Waking Up. And he's, I think it has to do with creating a spiritual life without religion.
Oh, right up my alley.
Yeah. And he wrote a book and it's called Waking Up. He's a neuroscientist.
Oh, okay.
And so he has an app that goes along with that, Waking Up. And then he also has a podcast called Making Sense. And I'm telling everybody I know about this because the 7 years that I trained in Vajrayana Buddhism and going through all that, oh my God, you just wouldn't believe the hoops you have to jump through in terms of the discipline and the ritual of developing, quote unquote, aware of consciousness. He gives he gives access to the same path, but without all of that. And so just his app on Waking, he has a I don't even know how many days it is. I'm like on 49th day, no, 50th day of the app. It's a course in meditation. But it's beyond mindfulness. It's about consciousness. It's about awareness of one's consciousness. And it's tremendously, really powerful.
Oh, it sounds good. I'm going to check it out. Definitely.
Yeah, I really want people, and he's opened it up for free to everybody. He's got a paywall in there on both of them, which is really interesting from our standpoint. But he dropped the paywall so that everybody can have access to what he's doing because he feels it's so helpful.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about apps and spirit world and different things. First of all, I love technology. I'm not one of those people that thinks it's a bad thing. I think it's energy. And if, we ultimately are energy, it's just another way of connecting more immediately.
And look at us talking across the
country. I was just going to say that.
God, I mean, you're in California and I'm in Baltimore.
Yeah. During the social distancing. I know, during social distancing of coronavirus. Hello. Thank God for technology. But so there's some people that I've got to dig up this article because I've now referenced it twice and I have no idea what I'm talking about. But basically, they, how people have these spirit, they're like recorders that they're picking up on voices or something.
Yes.
So it's like that, but they're trying to build it into an app.
Oh my.
And basically they're marketing it as like talk to your people, which I know is ridiculous. But I wonder if in the future there could be just like an app situation where you could either check on messages that they send when
through
you're
the
asleep.
Frequency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's like decoded. I don't know. I think it's kind of weird and early.
Sure, but a lot of veils are being dropped, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
That was one of the most powerful books I ever read, The Veils of Avalon. Did you ever read that book?
No. Gosh, you're giving me a whole bunch of things to do. I love it. Oh
my God, it's a great book. But it's an old book. It's been around for 20 years or something or more. And I didn't read it in the beginning. I read it, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. The Veils of Avalon. It's about the Celtic Christianity and about everything you're talking about the frequency, and it's about old wise women and herbs and the King Arthur and the knights in the night table. I mean, it's really, that was my first introduction to this sense of veils, of dropping veils, the thin veil between the energy world, the spirit world, and the physical world.
Let's take a short break and we'll be right back. So I want to ask you a couple questions. One is, have you ever had any dreams that feel like more like dreams, but they don't have to, of anybody that's passed away, like your mother or your father or anybody else, your brother?
I can't say that I have, Lisa.
Do you remember your dreams in general?
Oh, God, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
I totally remember my dreams.
Now I'm curious about you're very, the fact that you studied Buddhism and like, there's a sense of like, yeah, I already like, that's the part where I say you're like an old soul where you're like, yep, been here, done that. You're totally comfortable with it. You're not freaked out about it. And then you're drawn to learning about Buddhism, but then the openness to the whole thing it seems like it's not open, and that could be intentional because we could choose a life where we say, I don't want that to be open. I want to be learning on my, it's like having, what were those cliff notes or whatever that people used to write papers? Like you could say like, no, I don't want that. I want to literally do this on my own. No internet, no cliff notes. I want to write this paper with my own research books or whatever. So that could be something that your spirit has chosen for your life. I don't know, but there is an interesting dichotomy there, don't you think? Because usually people who are into Buddhism are also into spirits and crystals, and at least in America,
Yeah. It's interesting. It's just so bizarre. My experience. I'm not even sure I can make sense of it myself. I don't. I am drawn deeply into deeply spiritual things. Once the mystical part gets into it, then I start to become skeptical.
Mm-hmm.
And the particular brand of Buddhism that I followed, Tibetan Buddhism, and Shogam Trungpa Rinpoche, who died in the late 80s. Son came on as the what they called the Sakyong, turned out to be just a mess, and there's been all sorts of abuse, sexual abuse in the past 2 years that just threw me into, okay, that's it, I'm done. And I had gone to a very rigorous path of preparing for some empowerments that are mystical in nature. And I think that I was ambivalent and unclear about that as I was going forward. And so I kind of shut the door on that for a bit over the last 2 years. But now I'm starting to realize that, you can't, Tibetan Buddhists aren't the only ones who are in touch with the nature of the mind. And the Buddha wasn't the only one either. He was able to articulate it and teach it. But the nature of mind is inherent to what it means to be human, which is why a guy like Sam Harris is so interesting to me, because he's coming from it from a neuroscientific standpoint. And so that speaks to me deeply. And I'm more, I guess I can be more accepting to my own experience of hearing and feeling my own guides through letting go of anyone trying to tell me what they are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're not trendy when it comes to this. You take it very seriously. And I feel the same way. And I don't like when first of all, it's trendy sometimes. People get where they're not really getting the deeper message. They're just sort of like, oh my God, you guys, look at my amethyst ring. And you're like, okay, anyways, not that there's anything wrong with that. There's not, but there is a deeper knowledge underneath all that. And also the human abuse of that power. If you get into a position, it's scary.
You can't really trust. I don't know who to trust. I mean, other than myself and my own experience.
Yeah. And I think that is what it should be. And I think we shouldn't give anybody any kind of power over us in that way. But sometimes if you want to have a spiritual teacher, then that gets confusing.
Yeah, I lost you there.
I know. I knew you did this time. You know why? Because it got very quiet. And I felt nervous. So I was like, I'm out here by myself. Maybe that's the message. You were by yourself.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. I like things like, I mean, this is going to discredit me to a lot of people, but anyways, I'm just have to be myself. I like Ancient Aliens. Okay. I like it because I know they're very dramatic and stupid about it, but I like that. I've always been interested in archaeology and like just knowing that these spiritual teachings have been around in every culture all over the world. And there's similar things like Stonehenge and things like that that are all over the world that don't make any sense, but that the people were trying to make sense of it.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's what I'm drawn to.
Yeah. Particularly the contemplatives, that was something that, is common to all cultures. It's those people who did rest within silence and listen to their own nature speak to them. Being connected to something more powerful than just one's everyday experience. So that's the trick, is like, okay, what's real? What am I making up? And what's my mind saying? What is my mind making up versus what is real? And, and that's where awareness comes in. That's where the training comes in, so just giving space to be able to observe and be aware of all that comes up. I mean, the craziness and the sanity. And the wisdom. So,
and I also think with spirituality or any of these types of things, there's different vibrations, just like there's, literally different colors of the rainbow, but the vibration some people need maybe or resonate to a deeper vibration, and someone else might, resonate with a higher vibration, which might be things move faster and it's more about crystals and like sparkly things and connecting with energies and angels. And, there's a certain kind of, but angels can also come from the other deeper ones as well. But do you know what I'm saying? Like, I think we all experience it at different levels, and it doesn't make one more credible than the other.
I know. Like, I know some people who I have great respect for, and Julia Cameron is one of them. And she is very much into the tinkling of, crystals and sensation. And it's like, damn, I wish I could be that way. I
want to be tinkling with some sensations. What the hell?
Do that. But my biggest hang up is when I don't believe. Sometimes I don't know when I'm full of shit and when I'm not. That's my hang up.
That's enlightenment, man. Right? Because I think if you think I don't know. I mean, I try to know, like, am I talking shit right now? Am I just making this up? Or is this like true life? I know. That's why I wanted to have a whole podcast just talking about this topic, because I don't know. So I'm learning, and as I'm talking, I'm learning. As I'm talking to people, I'm learning. So it's like, I'm in it. We're in the zone. I like that you don't know, because if you know, I don't know. That's off-putting.
God. I err on the side of caution too, and I don't give myself enough credit. And that's another, that's the extreme. That's the flip side of it. It's like, okay, like, I don't give myself enough credit when it's pouring out of me. But one of the things I've noticed, I've started, I've been tapping into storytelling, and when I was young, I always would say, when you would put a microphone in front of me, something would come over me that I really had no. I couldn't turn it on or turn it off. It was just a sense of, oh yeah, here I am. This is what needs to be done. And I've been tapping into that, doing storytelling, not reading like I did today, but just speaking from a prepared story, but from my own experience. And I'm blown away by the power of it.
Well, you're really good at it. I was really quiet when I was younger. So I'm learning now that I have to work at being able to articulate myself. And if someone says, wow, that was really well said, I'm like, oh, okay, great. But I was really quiet growing up. And for me, instead of the microphone, it was flashing lights. I loved having my picture taken.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah. My sister would be like looking away or looking all grumpy. And I'm like an infant, like doing my over the shoulder shot, like into the camera. I just knew, I was like, work it.
Oh my God. Did you ever stop doing that?
Yeah. Like now, because I feel like everything took such a toll on me, like physically, the grief and everything. So, I mean, because I want to do more video blogs. I used to do a lot of video stuff. I like being on camera. I don't know why. I know a lot of people don't, but I feel comfortable expressing myself through a camera more than in person. Isn't that strange?
Oh, no. It's so interesting. See, that's the thing that Julia Cameron talked about. She called it a U-turn. And when she said it, I was like floored by it, because I had never heard that term before. Where very creative people tend to, not all creative people, but very creative people tend to be headed in a certain directions. But at a certain point, when they either obviously don't get enough praise or get too much praise, they stop dead in their tracks and turn away to get what she's talking about.
I lost you at turn away. And I know it didn't record. Well, I think it didn't record. I might be wrong, but
About the what Julia Cameron was saying.
yeah, like right at the point when they get too much praise or not enough praise, they turn
They do a
away.
U-turn. They turn away and go into something secondary from their primary talent, from their primary calling, and they go into a secondary or even a lower tiered energy level of competence, and so that they won't get enough praise, or that they won't get the praise is what scares them. And in my case, that's what happened. I was, and I'm finding that to be a really, really interesting dynamic, especially in the audience that I serve, which is an older group of people. Like I'm 67, so people my age that are approaching retirement or are retired and who don't know what to do with themselves or want to find within themselves something deeper that they've not tapped into or once did tap into and want to get back to. It's somewhat because of this whole U-turn phenomenon.
What was your thing that you did before?
I was in theater.
Oh
yeah, from a very young age, from grade school age on. And I was a performer. And anytime, I mean, a girl growing up in the 50s and the 60s who's, public speaking, are you kidding me? I loved it. I was a natural. I wasn't ever scared of it. It's not the biggest fear in my life. It was the biggest love of my life. And at a certain point in my 20s, I just said, Betsy, you are full of shit. He said, you're getting all this praise and you can't follow it up. So instead of going to New York, which is where I was headed, I said, oh, no, you'll be eaten up alive. You'll end up a prostitute and broke. Don't do that. So instead, I went to Martha's Vineyard, which is, where they had summer stock. And I was a bartender. And, I didn't turn into a prostitute, but I did go broke. And then later on, I changed my, I went into visual arts, which honestly, I wasn't talented in. But it wasn't until I got into my 30s and my 40s that I went back I did stand up. I took a course. I didn't say I did the whole routine, but I did enough to get out and, do some stand up. I had done some storytelling. I had a son that we did a lot of storytelling. I did a lot of storytelling as his, parent, went through that whole thing. And then went into teaching art. And it's only now that I'm starting to get back to that true source of power that I remember, and I'm feeling it again. And I'm really not sure what to do with it, but I'm moving with it.
So Julia Cameron is saying basically that we are afraid of going into it.
It could be both. It could be either you're afraid of it, right? Because you didn't get enough praise or support, or that you got too much praise and support. And like for me, it was the real imposter syndrome. Like, oh yeah, everybody's telling me I'm good at this, but I'm just making this shit up. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Right. And
we had that imposter syndrome is, if only we knew that so many years ago, like how much that would have helped people.
Yeah, that would help me a lot. And it's taking me a lot of inventory of self-examination to get down to this, to understand, because it wasn't until I went and was in that workshop and because you and I experienced a lot of the training, I believe, through Don't Keep Your Day Job and the accelerator program and all that with Kathy Heller.
Yeah.
It was just touching the surface for me, and I couldn't figure out why I couldn't just nab it, just name it and go with it. And I realized first of all, I've had so many years of covering it up, of burying it, that it's just taking me a longer time and a lot of contemplation and sitting with myself to realize that my true love and passion is to perform, is to be in front of people, is to, inspire through the spoken word. and whatever form that takes. It could be my own writing, it could be, performance. I'm not really sure so far yet, but I'm trying out a lot of different things in these live events that my husband and I are doing. And
Can you talk a little bit about the live events?
Yeah. So my husband Joe and I got married about a year ago, so that's kind of cool.
Woo-hoo, congratulations.
I recovered from that disastrous second marriage I was in.
Does he know your brother? Did he know your brother?
No.
Okay, good. You're safe. You're
yeah,
safe.
right. My brother had nothing to do with it. Oh God. So anyway, Joe is an art teacher too. So we both have the, common background. He's also a musician. So we have been holding these live events together. They're under the tutelage of Elder and Wiser podcast. But like I did an intuitive painting workshop, and then we did a blackout poetry live event. And then we did a writing and meditation live event. And then the next event, I lost you, right? Hi. Sorry.
I love the way you just said hi. I lost you after meditation event.
This is going to be a bitch to edit. I'm really sorry.
No, I've had worse. Trust me.
Oh God.
This is going to be medium, middle child for both of us being middle children. Okay, so you said you had a meditation event.
I had a meditation and writing event, and then we had a storytelling event, and I was able to get about 9 different storytellers, and it was in an art gallery that there was a show called Au Natural. It was the theme. And so we held a storytelling event based upon the theme Au Natural, very much modeled on the moth, which is out of, Brooklyn. And where everybody had like 4 minutes to tell a story with their spin on the theme. And it was awesome. And it was the first time I got up in front of an audience and told a story from my own experience in 20 years. So
wow.
It was so powerful. And I actually hosted it, and I loved it, and it was a smashing event. I have set up a bunch of meetups here in Baltimore. One of them is called Artist Talk, which is how I first got started with the podcast, and I switched it over to Elder and Wiser, but where artists would talk about their work in the gallery. And so I had done these live podcasts. And so, I love that stuff.
Oh, I love that.
I know. It was like, it was cool. And so, Facebook was a key in getting, we had like 50 people there. And I have to be honest, Lisa, the number keeps growing every time I tell the story. All right. I think it was like 40 to 45.
Oh, 5 people. That's okay.
Because these have been small events, but they're growing. And so I'm just trying to figure out, what to do next. So.
Oh, I love that. I don't know if you know, but I have a documentary that screened in Los Angeles last September.
I heard
called
about
Soul
that.
Providers. Yeah. It's just, it was after Derek died, a year after. I decided I wasn't going to do anything creative. And I had this idea to film 10 artists, just film them working in different types of artists. And then I asked people, I said, can I film you? And I don't know what it's going to be for. It's going to be some kind of art documentary. And they were like, okay. And I'm like, what? Some of the people I knew, but some I didn't know. And I thought, I don't know if I would have said yes, but, so I just went to their house and I set up a couple cameras and just shot them for I think about an hour. I said, just do whatever you would normally do, but now with cameras in your face. And then, and then after that, then I sat down with them, I mic'd them, and I asked them questions about their process, about what keeps them going, what motivates them, were they supported growing up being an artist. So I love that. That's like my favorite thing. Is
wow. And it was in the festival.
Yeah, it was in Valley Film Festival in North Hollywood. It screened, and the people I actually took, because someone told me I wanted to be like a docu-series.
Yeah.
Or so. And that was really hard. And someone said, well, edit it down, half of the people, edit it down and make it into a feature film and enter it into the film festivals. And with all this stuff going on, I only ended up entering it into one because I'm still trying to figure out. I don't think it should live as a feature. I think it needs to be a docuseries, and especially seeing it that way. I felt like it was okay, but I wanted the flow to be different. It's kind of a lot of lives to take in, and I don't think you get enough inside each person.
Yeah.
When they're 5, I want it to be 2 max for a half hour or an hour.
Yeah.
So half an hour, 15 minutes each.
Right.
So yeah. So
that's the beautiful thing about film. You can always just keep going back and editing it, giving it new life.
Yeah. And I still have the other 5 that no one's ever seen. And granted, I won't say there was 50 people in the theater because there wasn't. I didn't promote it. It was a week or 2 weeks after my film festival that I just started.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. The Ag and Art Film Festival, which is artists from all over the world. And I mean, is really good. But, yeah, so I was kind of burned out. And so I didn't even really promote it. But 4 of the people, was it 4 or 3? 4 of the people, wait, I can't add right now, were there. So I was really happy about that. And so that was the first time seeing it. And it's like 5 years.
What did you feel when you saw it?
Oh, God, I felt
up on the screen.
Well, there was also some problems with, wasn't sure how it was going to show up there. That's the other thing, just technically, that's a nightmare. It's so terrifying. I'm like, oh my God, I put all this energy into it and then it's probably just going to look like mud or something. But it actually looked really good.
Oh, cool.
But I felt sick. I felt like I was dying. I felt like I'd rather be dead. I can't believe I even thought I could do this. Like it was all of my fear.
Before you saw it or while it was happening?
Knowing that people were going to come to it that knew about it and that were in it and that they had never seen any parts of it at all.
Yeah.
Was freaking me out. And then during it, I kind of just was okay. I was calming down because I was like, okay, it looks good. But it was my biggest fear. And I had to face that. I had to face, it's so weird. It's like, why even make a film if you don't plan on anyone else seeing it?
I know, right.
When I made it, I made a promise with myself that I wouldn't figure out all that kind of stuff at that time because I was like, I don't want to get all into the marketing part of it. I just want to create for the sake of creating. So
I kind of get that. I know exactly what you mean by that because within that process, you're discovering the thing that's lighting you up.
Right. I had to reconnect because I was really knocked offline, you know. And then after I had finished filming the 10th person, and I was importing the footage into my computer, my brother died unexpectedly.
Oh.
So then I was like, how do I
pick back up?
Yeah. And then, so it took me a long time to even get something that anybody else would see because I would get mad about the whole project. One minute I'd be like, I'm going to do this in his honor. And then I'd swing to the other extreme and go, screw that. I hate life right now. Nobody's getting anything good from me. So it was.
So where are you now?
With that in myself.
And the video
with the film, I haven't touched it again, but I want to, I think I want to do it as a docuseries because part of the film festival, they had a bunch of distributors there and they picked certain filmmakers to go in and do these roundtables where you'd pitch it to them.
Yeah.
And so I pitched it I went around to each person. Everybody loved, because I want it to be a series like Chicken Soup for the Soul. I want to go around to different cities. Yeah. So this one was Soul Providers Los Angeles, but I want to do Soul Providers, London, Soul Providers, wherever, all over the place. And the same format, but just show how we're so similar, but then there's these little nuanced differences too.
Yeah.
And the city is really another character to the art as well.
Yeah.
Because that's a part of it. LA, living and working in LA as an artist is very different than it would be like in New York, obviously.
Yeah. Right.
So I want to do it that way. When I pitched it that way, everybody was excited about it. All the distributors were like, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds, send me this, send me that. But I didn't send anybody anything because I wanted to be ready and organized with my thoughts before I did that.
Right.
So I'm still getting ready in my mind.
No, I get that. I think I know that action brings clarity, but there's a decluttering that I think that has to happen in that period of being ready, that is laying the groundwork for full submersion.
Yeah.
That's
I
been my
always tell people I'm editing when I'm nowhere near my computer.
Are you thinking about how the setup might be in terms of the physical space when you say you're editing?
Sometimes, but sometimes it just feels like energetically, I'm locking onto a perspective.
And you're drawing it towards you?
No, I feel like I'm being calibrated. I feel like for me, art is I'm channeling it in from somewhere else.
Uh-huh.
So, or some other, maybe spirit guides or something are helping me, and it's my skills. It's me, I'm doing it, but, I'm being helped. And so I can't just be on my own and be like, okay, I need to cut this and throw this over there. I am working with other energies in my mind. And so they're working with me, preparing me to understand the energy of something that goes, I can't explain it in words. It's just like right now I'm looking at this picture of a farm, and it has a beautiful sunset. And the way that the light is with the clouds and then the trees and the way the fence goes up the side, the white fence, like all those things are energy. And why this perspective? Why am I looking at the sky in this particular way with these clouds? Why not have the sky with no clouds? Or why not wait until the day has puffy clouds? I don't know. So it's energy. And so when I'm picking up on stuff before I'm editing, that's what it is for me.
Wow.
I don't know how else to explain it, but I'm sort of picking up on that framework, and I'm expressing it through the choices I make. And if I could express it to you in words, I wouldn't need to make the film or make the paint or
wow.
tell the poetry or whatever. Yeah.
So can we see the documentary you have of the artist on Vimeo or on any other?
No, not yet, but
okay.
I might be able to see a secret link at some point.
Oh,
yeah.
Good. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I would love for you to
see what you're talking about.
Thank you. And it's funny because in the Death Talk podcast, I have the other one that I talk about the process of when you're going towards your dreams and the reality of it and all the real stuff that happens. And there's so much overlap with that documentary, with this documentary, because like I say, and I've got this from somewhere else on Instagram, but you can't talk about death without talking about life.
Right.
And it just goes hand in hand. So the fact that we're all the way out here in this other place talking about art is not really unrelated at all to our thoughts about death. And because we're talking about our lives.
Yeah.
And so on that note, I do want to ask you, because you talk about the importance of storytelling in your life, what would you want your story to be? What would you want the synopsis, I guess, of Betsy Heeney's life after you die? What would you want your people to remember you by in terms of like a story? Like there was a girl who was born, la, la, la.
That's a really great question, Lisa. Do you ask this question of all your guests?
No, because you emphasize storytelling so much that I thought, and plus just the story you read in the beginning is so powerful.
I think that the story that I would hope would be known is that Betsy, third person, discovered her true nature and reveled in it and inspired others to find their own.
Oh, I love it. See, that's great. Did you think for a minute it was going to be hard?
Sort of.
Well, I don't detect
I'm getting closer to it, though. At least I think that's a good sign. I'm getting closer to it.
Oh, good. And I want you to know that I don't detect any bullshit.
Good.
And do you think you're afraid of your own death at all? I know you said you don't want the pain, but well,
you're talking to somebody. I started Elder and Wiser podcast because I was in such denial about getting old. I mean, I just never, the energy level I have, people tell me all the time, it's not your typical upper 60-year-old. You know, I have a really high energy level. I don't stop. This quarantine thing, self-quarantine, is really challenging because it's like, wait a minute, you know, I broke my toe on Sunday, for example. And
and you know, that's very weird because you posted about the feet on Instagram.
I know, right?
That is so weird.
It's so weird. But the only thing I can, you know, gather is that some obstacle had to be put in my way to save my life, because not that I would be putting other people in danger, but I wouldn't have wanted to stop. So I've completely turn inward in sense of my energy level. I'm giving it. I'm continuing with this whole decluttering thing, of like so that I'm preparing the groundwork for another wave of deep digital work. I'm going to be doing a lot of live demonstrations for my students online, and so I'm preparing the groundwork for that. So. I think what was your question? How do I get down that road? Oh, the foot. That I think that I by breaking my toe forced me to sit on the couch and put my foot up with ice for 3 days until I went back to how to check yesterday. And doing that, you know, I read a book, I, you know, did a bunch of stuff, but I was sitting. I couldn't be moving.
Thank you so much for talking with me. And I know we could talk forever. And now I'm even realizing we have even more in common. It's crazy.
Lisa, I deeply, deeply appreciate you asking me to be on.
Oh no, I lost you after the second deeply. Betsy?
Yeah, I know.
I heard you after the second deeply, and then you went away. I was like, what is she deeply?
I'm deeply loving talking to you. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Thank you so much for listening. All the links and anything that I mentioned in today's episode will be available on deathtalkpodcast.com in the show notes. Thank you so much.